Welcome everyone to the African Technology and Innovation Institute's celebration of Africa Day. Today is Africa Day, which was instituted by the African Union, and we all here present as Africans are here to celebrate that day. And indeed, I say to everyone that everyone around the world is an African, because it all started on the continent. So if you're joining from the UK, the US, wherever you're joining from, Australia, all around the world, welcome and thank you for joining us in celebrating Africa Day, which is really celebrating our joint humanity. The theme for our celebration today is Responsible AI for Climate Action in Africa. The theme from the African Union for Africa's Day celebration actually is Education and Skill Development, an Imperative for the Continent. And so today we are really excited and honored to have amazing panelists that are experts in their respective fields. And most of them are so famous and popular that I'm sure you know their names already. But we're really honored to have amazing panelists whom I'll be introducing later join us here to talk about how we all can collaboratively ensure that we have climate action, intentional climate action for Africa, and utilizing responsible artificial intelligence in doing so. But even more so that as we go on this journey, that we ensure that education and skill development is an imperative, and we continue to ensure that Africa is center forward in the green economy and in the artificial intelligence ecosystem. So I'm really excited about today's discussion and lots of notes to be taken. I guess I did not introduce myself at the start, but the Zoom says my name. I am Rose Margaret Ekenyitua, a professor of engineering in the US and the founder and CEO of African Technology and Innovation Institutes. So thank you once again, everyone, for being here. This is webinar style, because I know some people say to me, I feel all alone. I don't see other people in the Zoom. There are other people that have joined, but it's webinar style. So the only people you're seeing are really the panelists here. But please feel free to use the chat and make your comments in the chat. You can also ask questions as we progress through the panel discussion today. We've got a packed agenda, but of course, center forward is the discussion we'll be having today with our panelists, but also in celebration of climate action, and just to bring to the center of our discussion and just to center our discussion around climate action, we have a video that will play about climate action to ensure that we all understand the far-reaching impact of climate action, and that it is an imperative for us to really start mitigating the effects of climate action. As part of the celebration of Africa Day 2, African Technology and Innovation Institute had a poetry competition for the youth of Africa around how to utilize AI for climate action. And so later on, we'll play one or two videos on that and give awards to the winners of that competition, which we ran for the last 2 weeks. Okay, so without much further ado, we will play a video on climate action, and then after that, we will start our panel discussion, and I will introduce our panelists. what devastating effects climate action is having all around the globe. And part of that video, I'm sure most of you saw in the news last week, or in the last couple of weeks, is here on the continent, was in Kenya. And so the far-reaching effects of climate action are real, and they're here. And it's time that we really act on it, and it's time that Africa is center forward in this leadership of climate action. And so today, we are going to be talking about how we on the continent can really lead in utilizing artificial intelligence in combating climate action. So thank you very much, everyone, once again for joining. And without much further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists here, and we will get right down to having our discussion today. So first, I have here Professor Jerry John Ponyo. Welcome, Professor Jerry John Ponyo. Professor Jerry John Ponyo is the Dean of the Quality Assurance and Planning Office at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology under the Vice Chancellor's Office. Previously, he held the position of Dean and Faculty of Electrical and Electronics and Computer Engineering at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology. Before assuming the role of Dean, he served as the head of Electrical Electronics Engineering Department. And so my colleague, that's my field, Electrical Electronics Engineering. He's the project lead for the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology Engineering Education Project, KEEP, a $5.5 million Africa Center of Excellence impact project sponsored by the World Bank, with a focus on digital development and energy, and the co-founder of the Responsible AI Network, RAIN, for Africa. So super impressive profile. RAIN is a collaborative effort between Kwame Nkrumah University and TUM Germany. Between 2016 and 2019, he was a visiting professor at ESIGELEC France on a staff mobility program where he taught postgraduate courses in business intelligence, conducted research with staff at that institute. He currently leads the Emerging Networks and Technologies Research Lab at the Faculty of Electrical Electronics and Computer Engineering at Kwame Nkrumah University, which focuses on digital development technologies research. So welcome, Professor Jerry Ponyo. It is an honor to have you here, and thank you for the impact you're having on the continent and in the field. So let's all welcome Professor Ponyo.
Thank you.
Yes. So our next speaker is Mrs. Nella Duke Ekpenyong. Welcome, Mrs. Nella Duke Ekpenyong. So Mrs. Nella is an investor, award-winning conservationist. I was talking to my kids about that particular title, and they're like, wow, that's a lot. Philanthropic advisor and entrepreneur with over a decade of experience in collaborating with prominent institutions dedicated to large-scale growth and development initiatives in Africa. Nella is the co-founder and CEO of a multi-family office, Legacy Capital. Additionally, Nella oversees the operations of Obudu Capital, local government seed fund, and accelerator firm, which stands out as an Africa's pioneering biomimicry-inspired fund. And I saw biomimicry, I was really excited about that because it's center core of innovative development in engineering utilizing biomimicry. So through Obudu, Nella channels investments into climate technology projects aimed at facilitating climate adaptation across Africa. Through her nonprofit endeavors, Obudu Conservation Center, she actively contributes to environmental research and community development efforts in Obudu Plateau. So welcome once again, Mrs. Nala Duke-Peyong. I'm really excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for the great work you're doing. Okay, last and definitely not the least, we have amazing Mr. John Kamara. We're excited to have Mr. John Kamara here. Mr. John Kamara is the CEO of Edenian Labs and the chair of AI Center of Excellence for Africa. John Kamara is a transformative figure in Africa's tech landscape, serving as the CEO of Edenian Labs and the chair of the AI Center of Excellence in Africa. At Edenian Labs, he drives innovation by leveraging technology to address Africa's unique challenges in healthcare, agriculture, finance, and education, which are really core issues that we face on the continent, as well as building smart technology capacity on the continent and beyond. As chair of the AI Center of Excellence in Africa, he's dedicated to advancing artificial intelligence to propel Africa into the global tech arena. Kamara's championship on African tech and AI inspire audiences around the world to invest in the continent's boundless potential. With unwavering dedication, he's propelling Africa's tech revolution, pushing for AI adoption, and shaping a future marked by innovation and progress. So welcome, Mr. John Kamara. Really honored and excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And so attendees, you see that we've got a powerhouse of panelists here. And so we're going to have some really great discussions. Please, like I mentioned at the start, put your comments, questions in the chat as we progress through. And at the end, we will have some time for Q&A, some time to ask our panelists questions. But panelists also feel free real time to respond to some questions in the chat. But at the end of the discussion, we will allow the attendees to also ask questions real time. Okay, so drum roll, we're ready to hear from the people moving and shaking and shaping Africa's AI and also environmental resiliency space. So you are all recognized as experts in your field. Can you please tell us more about the work you do, and in particular focusing on AI and climate action? And I know I already read out your bios, but if there's any part that I've missed, or if there's any particular work or project that you're currently working on that you'd like our attendees to be aware of and just to talk about. So we will start with Professor John Ponyo.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rose. So one additional thing with reference to what I'm doing currently borders on my leading the Responsible Artificial Intelligence Lab at KNUST here, RAIL for short. And at RAIL, we look at the responsible utilization of AI as far as the key sectors of the economy is concerned. And one of the main areas that we are working on is the application of artificial intelligence, especially in the area of agriculture, and looking at how we can work with smallholder farmers as far as plant diseases are concerned. Directly related to the discussion that we currently are having, AI in climate action. If you look at the video that we just watched, basically it borders on flooding. And so one of the most recent projects that we are working on is how we are able to use AI to predict floods. For those of you who are familiar with the Accra setting, it's like an annual ritual when on a regular basis we have floods. But if we have the right data sets, it should be possible to look at a number of parameters and be able to make a prediction whether there is the likelihood of flood or not. And with this information, we should be able to work with NADMO, which basically is those who are able to assist people when there are floods. We should be able to work with them to preempt the likelihood of a flood and put measures in place as far as protecting life and property is concerned. Additionally, if you look at the whole issue about climate action, the ability to work closely with the required agencies requires that there is availability of data. And so one of the things that we also are doing is making sure that we are gathering what we call Afrocentric data sets that are of the African origin, that helps us be able to put in various interventions that help our unique situation. So by way of preliminary remarks, this is what currently we are doing, and it is our hope that by the responsible application of AI, there is a lot that we can do as a continent. On this note, once again, I want to wish each and every one of us a happy Africa Union Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ponyo, for really highlighting some other essential projects that you're working on. I just love when you talked about focusing on agriculture, because that's a really big item for the continent, especially as we move away from fossil fuels, trying to get into the agro economy, and then flooding. I know last year, a couple of years ago, even in Nigeria, there were terrible floods. And so it would really be great to utilize AI for early prediction of those floods, or even just to mitigate the far-reaching impacts on that and gathering Afrocentric data. Thank you. Now we'll move over to Mrs. Nella Duke.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Rose. I couldn't agree more with the professor. And so one thing that we're working on via the family office is that we're in collaboration with the Ugandan government. We're developing a framework for incentivizing entrepreneurs to develop more sustainable innovations. And a lot of that is centered around AI. And so you touched on biomimicry earlier. I assume everyone in the room has a vague idea what biomimicry is. But when looking at it through tech, which is, I guess, would be my background, it's seeing how can you utilize nature's innovations in a setting like Africa. Like, how can you innovate with nature in mind? And how can we use that framework for investing? So Africa is in a very beautiful space right now where we're very nascent and we don't have the resources, nor do we have the willpower that they have in the West to do this massive, turnover where you see in Europe, they're going from fossil to, electric cars, etc. We're not there yet, but what we do have is that we have a level of underdevelopment that allows us to innovate with sustainability in mind from the get-go. So we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And as this case study, one of the ventures that we're very excited about is one called Amini, and it touches on what Professor spoke about earlier, which is solving for Africa's environmental data scarcity. And what this company does is that they utilize AI and space technologies at scale to drive systematic change and to promote economic inclusivity for farmers and strengthen our supply chain across Africa and beyond. And again, it's that data, that's Afrocentric data that we're so missing. And I know we'll probably speak about this more throughout the discussion, but just to give you an idea of what I'm working on and something that I'm excited about.
Yeah, so thank you, Mrs. Ekpenyong. And again, biomimicry. It's great that Africa is centering itself on biomimicry, and you're really leading that charge, because really that's one of the ways to ensure sustainable development. And now putting on my engineering hat, wanted to also share to the attendees that solar panels, the surface of solar panels was actually created from biomimicry of the lotus leaf because it's hydrophobic. Because once we get too much water on solar panels, we have a lot of refraction and cannot optimize UV rays. Let me take off my professor hat and stop lecturing now. Okay, so You got me started on biomimicry, but that's really exciting. And to hear about your Uganda project, and again, real great emphasis on that Afrocentric data that Professor Ponyo spoke about. You're also working on that. So looking forward to additional great conversations about how we can really start gathering this Afrocentric data that we need. And so, well, I'm going to move over to Mr. Kamara that had a round of applause during his introduction to tell us a bit more about some of the work he's doing too that we might have missed out.
Hi everyone, really great work. So what I'm doing first is I'm building capacity for AI engineers in Africa. So I've been training data scientists and engineers since 2019 when I moved back. Because ultimately, without the expertise, then it really becomes difficult for you to do so many things that you use. My goal is to develop 10 to 20,000 engineers in the continent. The other thing that I'm working on is also around the forestry ecosystem and the development of, climate change rather than mitigation. I'm a big fan of adaptation. So really understanding how you have to readapt using the ecosystem. So in Kenya, there's a lot of trees being planted. So how do we access, real data, so ground source data? So again, creating jobs for young people using AI by ground source data. I kind of look at how you connect, the geospatial satellite data, which sometimes is not very correct and accurate, with ground source data by creating a lot of jobs for young people who can then become a lot more involved in how they use AI from an adoption perspective to really understand the predictive knowledge of how we're going to recreate the green forest and ultimately access some of the carbon finance money, because we can truly track what will happen, how it'll happen, the different types of parameters for that, and then build real explainable active interference models that can then build active interference models that can then define explainable AI at scale. And then the last thing in healthcare, so I'm doing quite a lot of work between the nexus of climate, healthcare, and agriculture. I truly believe that the three of them align to the principle of one human being and how AI can help us truly understand that nexus, healthcare, agriculture, and climate. So those are some of the things that I'm currently doing in the climate space at the minute.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kamara. And the laudable goal of training, I think you said over 10,000 engineers on the continent. That is super impressive goal. And yes, we definitely need a lot of skill development for our youth as we continue to create that workforce pipeline in the tech ecosystem. You mentioned geospatial data, and I think for the most part, as a continent, we have forgotten about the space industry, or maybe not completely forgotten, but that is another industry that will support the work that we do in conservation of the environment, and also just to your point about ensuring that we're utilizing our natural resources in forestry, I think speaks to Mrs. Ekpenyong's biomimicry technology, utilizing our natural resources for carbon capture and getting those carbon credits that are needed, and not forgetting healthcare and agriculture. Well, thank you very much, panelists, for letting us know some additional projects that you have been working on. Really exciting. And please, attendees, feel free to make comments, put questions in the chat. So the next question is, how can Africa position itself as a global leader in AI for climate action? We saw the video and it was gut-wrenching to see what's going on around the world, but we're feeling the impact. It's raining, it's flooding in even Dubai. We're having floods in Dubai, so this is real. And so the question is, how can we, as the continent, position ourselves as leaders in AI for climate actions. For the most part, the world seems to think that we lag behind technological innovations, but of course, we know that's not necessarily true. But this is an opportunity for us to take a lead. And so I think maybe this time we'll do some reverse engineering and we'll start with Mr. Kamara.
Okay. I mean, it's a good question. I think that, we're pretty much being affected by climate change more than most, people right now. And also because of our level of preparedness. So there's two conversations where you have the conversation of mitigation or adaptation. What do you really focus your energy, even when you want to build artificial intelligence around how you use that? And then that also comes into the context of data. How do you want to think about data? How do you want to collect data? And what are the structures that you want to build? And they want it because you're thinking. So in that perspective, one of the critical things that I think we should do is truly understand, where do we want to go? Are we leaning towards mitigation or are we leaning towards adaptation? It's extremely difficult to do both at the same time. And we've seen so many different agencies, all of them, it's like too much stuff happening without nothing really happening at the same time. So that's the first thing. And two, we then have to be extremely intentional about data. You can't lead anything if you don't have the primary resources. So Africa has a ton of data. I do not believe it doesn't have data. It has a ton of data. Even as of today, it has a ton of data that could have helped a lot of these problems that were already happening. Okay, so but the problem with that is that because those data sets and our policies are siloed, as skewed towards the global north policies about, how things should work, we forget that the primary goal of our continent is for us to utilize the contextual data that we have to begin to create open data platforms that allow us to actually train extremely intelligent models, rather than, and off the back of that, you also then need to be able to have human resources. It's extremely, I go to some ministries who are supposed to be environment and climate, and there's not one data scientist. So how are you going to be a leader? I don't understand that. It's impossible. There's a lot of talk about policy. A lot of stuff about in Africa and AI is all about policy and policy ethics and policy governance. Extremely important. I agree. But if you think about the global north, everybody is developing enterprise AI solutions. Everybody is building commercial AI solutions because they have to build to come solve problem for us. So I think the first thing is a re-engineering of the mind. We have to rethink, first of all, where we are, what we want to focus on. Then we have to own the space of what we want to focus on. And then ultimately create a standard value of how we look at data, how we get more engineers, and really spend money on research. Because you cannot, it's not a fintech business you just build. You have to research, you have to keep researching. And as you keep researching, you keep building new, deeper. So in my view, over the past 5 years that I've been here, we lack in research. And if you don't invest in research, and that's what AI is showing us now more than anything else, if you do not invest in research, there's no way on earth you are going to be any kind of a leader in this industry. It's not going to happen. And that's just the truth. But, we can sugarcoat it whatever way we want and make it sound real fancy and great. And it's the same thing with the climate finance money or the money at, COP28, COP27. How we have not been able to access any of that money. Because again, we don't understand the fundamental principles of data standardization because, the money is supposed to come to us to help us with the effect, but we don't build infrastructure that will allow us to conduit this money. So we're only playing on the surface. So, there's a lot of, a couple of things, but I think the principal thing in my view is we need to have a research culture and we need to really understand that policies that we make should be in favor of what we want to do, rather than just a global policy of protectionism against just, what is happening and ultimately, really drive adoption of developing AI engineers in this continent.
Well, that was really packed. Thank you, Mr. Kamara. And again, the question, adaptation versus mitigation, would like the audience to start thinking about that and putting what their thoughts are. Which one should we focus on? I think I know which one we should be focusing on, but would like to see what the audience think about that. But I think that is a really great question to ask us as a continent and to really start centering us on the work of leading as a continent in the field. And also about just ensuring that policy is not necessarily driving innovation, but innovation should drive policy. And really, that's what happens in the global north. Innovation drives policies, but I think we constantly in the global south focus on policies, governance are great, but then somehow I find that they start stifling innovation. So innovation should really be pushing policy and governance. And so really creating that rich R&D ecosystem that you speak about. And I think the work that you're doing at DNN Labs is really speaking to that. So thank you. We'll move on to Mrs. Nella Duke-Keyon.
Wow, that was there isn't much to add, but I have a bias towards climate adaptation myself. And when looking at how Africa can position herself as a global leader in climate action, very much like John shared, it's beyond policy, but it's also looking at data collection, research, analysis, investing in people and building capacity on the continent, which is right. I think at the present moment, that is extremely important, and that's some of the work. I don't want to get into the weeds of it because I don't think I can answer the question any better than John has. But it's essentially, as you said, innovation should drive policy. And that's something that Africa has always been lacking behind in when looking at the rest of the world, is that we're looking for governance to shift our perspective and to shift our drive, but it never has worked that way in any successful economy. And that's, again, what we're trying to unpack with the fund and the family office, which is how can we work with governments and innovators. So when we do the showcase, what we're actually bringing to them is we're bringing climate tech innovators from all over the continent to have this showcase, to have a discussion, to have a 3-day convening where these sustainable frameworks can be implemented, but looking at it from an innovation perspective as opposed to the government, because the government doesn't know what to do. I say that with all the respect in the world, but the government it's not the role of the government. Government has no business doing business, right? So it doesn't make sense to look to them for those progressions in our society. But yes, again, highlighting what John had already shared, which is, building capacity, research, data analysis, and, allocating resources intelligently.
Thank you, Ms. Keyon. And yes, I guess since you've let the cat out of the bag, I'm also for adaptation rather than mitigation. So those of you, I'm not sure what people were voting in the chat, but I hope if you chose adaptation, then you're right on point, because I think that's where we could position ourselves as leaders on the continent. And globally too. And really great to hear about the work you're doing on ensuring that we're creating frameworks and policies, but you're going with the innovation first approach and not the policy first approach in order to ensure that we do not stifle innovation. Now we'll move on to Professor Ponyo.
Okay, thank you. It's been great listening to John and then listening to Nella with reference to what we actually need to do as a continent. I have had calls to speak about this on other panels with reference to the need for us to be intentional and the need for us to have a plan as far as climate action is concerned. The reality is that if you look at the entire continent, you can actually count the number of countries who have actually developed a national AI strategy and actually are rolling it out. So that is at the continental stage. So primarily what that means is that if we want to achieve something, it is important that we are intentional about it. It is important that we plan towards that. And so at the national level, it is important that we have a national AI strategy. For instance, in the Ghanaian context, myself and my lab have been very instrumental with reference to developing SAME. Beyond having national AI strategies, it is important that at the continental level, recently we have had the African Union have consultation with reference to having an AU strategy when it comes to AI. And recently also the advisory for AI at the UN published their interim report. And in all of them, you will realize that there is the need for some interventions as far as AI in climate action is concerned. The question we are answering is that what do we need to do? It is important that we go beyond the writings and actually begin to take steps as far as implementation is concerned. A lot has been said with reference to the need for us to have the right data sets as far as AI in climate action is concerned. These data sets are not just going to fall from heaven. It is important that we take steps towards ensuring that we are curating these data sets. And the reason I say this is that curating data sets is capital intensive. If we actually realize that data is what runs AI and AI is the new chip on the block and it's a game changer, then consciously we need to put steps in place to ensure that we have the right data sets. And so investing in data sets is very important. And it's important that we look at it at the national level, we look at it at the regional level, and we look at it also at the global level. The second thing that I talk about, a lot has been said with reference to focusing on research. And I want to agree with that. I currently lead a responsible AI lab. But the reality is that setting up the lab was as a result of funding that had been received from IDRC and GIZ, who are all from outside our jurisdiction. What that means is that there should be a replication of such research institutes that are funded locally, funded by resources from within. And the reality is that if we are committed to the cause, then we will allocate budgets for such interventions. And so let us invest in SAME. The third thing I want to talk about is that there is the need for collaboration between government, the private sector, and academia as far as driving research is concerned. A lot has been said about the need for us to look at innovation even before we draft policy. And what brings about innovation is research. And we must be seen to be establishing research institutions that will drive research as far as AI in climate action is concerned. Let us walk the talk and let's not just go for meetings and be talking about things using big English. It is important that we put steps in place to ensure we are doing the needful. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Professor Kodjo. I definitely echo that. Let's walk the talk. No more talk. And I know Mr. Kamara is a big advocate of that, and he was nodding his head. No more talking. We need to act. And I'm sure after this webinar, we'll all get together and talk about how to really push things forward in a meaningful way too. But I think I really love your focus on the data sets. The data set, Mr. Kamara said the data exists. And so it's a case of now just plugging this data into our existing AI systems or algorithms and ensuring that we are sharing this data with the rest of the world. Data like folks in the global north say is the new crude oil. And some people even say it's better than crude oil because it's sustainable. And the ROI you get from one data set is better than the ROI you'll get from 1 barrel of crude oil. So it's extremely important that we really start focusing on really curating the data and really sharing this data with the rest of the world and investing in infrastructure and enterprises around big data. And echo your sentiments and your comment on prioritizing research and development and really allocating meaningful funds. Nationally, each African country should have considerable funds allocated to R&D, because if we look at all the countries in the global north that have made meaningful strides in technological innovation, they have a huge portion of their national budgets allocated to research and development. And the only way forward is for governments to do so, and for us to ensure great industry, academia, government engagements. Wow, lots of really great comments coming through. So I think from all the conversations we've been having, one thing that keeps popping up is human resources. I think Mr. Kamara talked about that. Nala talked about just training the next generation, and you, Prof. Soponyo, you talk about the work you do with your students. And so it is really critical that we have meaningful capacity development on the continent. And I think that is why the African Union this year set the theme for African Day as education and skill development. And so I'm just wondering how you think Africa can go about meaningful and intentional capacity development in order for us to really position ourselves as leaders in this new ecosystem of green economy. And I think maybe we'll start with Mrs. Nella Duke.
Just to repeat the question, how can Africa reposition themselves as?
So yes, the question is, what capacity development areas should we prioritize in order for Africa to position itself as a leader in the green economy ecosystem?
Okay, that's a really good question. What areas of development? I think so. From our fund, what we've seen so I've been investing in Africa for 10 years. I definitely started out on the fintech, more commercial side of investing, and made my way back home to the sustainable investments. But what I've seen, and this sort of exists like throughout the I guess the founder ecosystem, is that what is lacking is I don't want to use the word lacking, but what is maybe missing sometimes is their skills acquisitions around whether it's dealing with the global north. So when you're looking at the global north, but also looking at deep research. So I think even from an innovative standpoint, there is a lack of design thinking that founders have, and that's something that we're making great strides in. We're working with the Biomimicry Institute, and we've come up with original curriculum to teach our founders, because we've seen that I think John alluded to this earlier, but if you don't even know where you're going, or the framework isn't right, and you don't have a strong foundation, it's really hard to reach a collective goal and mission. So for me, that's where I think that to make us more competitive, we need to spend a bit more time healing those foundations and supporting our youth with system design thinking.
Well, that's really great to hear that you've done a knowledge and skills gaps assessment and really identified that for lots of founders of tech innovations, that there seems to be a lack of that design thinking process in their design. And so that you're really focusing on developing curriculum to ensure that. And I think that's really great, because oftentimes we can jump into the capacity development space thinking this is what people need without actually doing a needs or gaps assessment. And seems like you've really done that. That's really great to hear. Thank you for that. We'll move on to Mr. John Kamara and then Professor Soponyo. So again, I will repeat the question and I'm rephrasing it. often changing the way I said it to Mrs. Nella. But in order for Africa to be a leader in the green economy ecosystem, what capacity development areas do you think we need to prioritize?
Okay. I mean, good. Again, back to really great point that Nella made about founders. But I want to kind of look at it from the ecosystem of the skill sets you need to actually build AI. So you have PwC just hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can
Hello,
hear
sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. You were
Okay, my
breaking up.
apologies.
Yeah.
The weather in Kenya and the internet. So I think PwC just published an article about the future of AI jobs and the future of jobs recently, and there was nothing about Africa. That was yesterday or 2 days ago. And that was very, very interesting because it kind of showed. Can you hear me? I think my internet is.
Yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear you. Oops, I think you froze. Oh,
Okay, I think this should be better. My apologies. The internet had a slight malfunction. So, I mean, I think, we need to build more data scientists and AI engineers in the continent. It's just without that, we can't develop a lot of things. It's just very difficult to play in the green economy from an AI perspective first. Then two, there's a mass framework of developing digital skills in Africa right now. A lot of organizations, foundations, agencies, everybody's like digital skilling. And taking from what Nella said, trying to understand what type of digital skills people now need for the next economy. So even with green economy, So give you an example. In agriculture, there's extension workers, right? And these are extension workers. Everybody knows them in every country. They're village extension workers, whatever. But, imagine if you train these people now to become carbon extension workers in those tiny little villages, and they actually use those basic skill sets to now change how you collect data at the very micro level to actually define AI. So it effectively means that you can create verification platforms that actually standardizes how you actually qualify carbon, because you have ground source truth and somebody who understands why and how to use simple. So really redesigning how you think about the new forms of skill you need to give people based on where you want to go. I think that's, and those skill sets, they actually, some of them don't have specific names right now, but the names come from the framework of what it is that you actually want to do, And when I was talking to an agent, I said, look, I'm going to train carbon extension workers. And they asked me, what does that mean? I'm like, well, I'm going to train thousands of young people in villages, convert them from village-based agriculture workers to carbon extension workers. I will give them the understanding of the carbon market, of how to collect data, how to look at different trees, and all of a sudden, and how to use very simple models to analyze what they collect every month, which means I can collect accurate data all the way into a carbon registry, into a verification model to then say, okay, this guy, this farm. So that is one thing. And if you couple that with really training then scientists who can then take that data, then the AI engineers who can take that data into what you now want it to do, you're already seeing that you're using the resource, the human resource. So it's a question of, everywhere I go, last month I was in Geneva, it's like qualitative human capital. Africa needs to develop qualitative human capital. We have too much quantitative human capital, which the value of the human capital against other parts of the world is not really valuable. So until we really figure out what is the qualitative value of a human capital in Africa as against the rest of the world, and how do you add more value into those people? So AI presents that. The other thing as well, if you think about capacity, you also look at it from, readiness in AI. So a lot of people who are in various, especially in government industries, who are in the areas of agriculture, climate, we need to give them AI readiness programs, so they also understand how to begin to function within the skill set. So if you don't, Singapore launched an AI readiness program for everybody over 40. And I'd been clamoring for this for like 3 years before that. Listen, we should train people, just generally give them knowledge, which means they become viable and sustainable human beings in that ecosystem. So as change happens, they change, they adapt to change. They don't become a mitigating factor to your change. So, rethinking what capacity means is actually the question. What is capacity as of today? And where do we need to layer capacity for us to play in the green economy? Then what type of capacity is then required in each framework of that, from private sector to government to, young youths in Africa? And how does that capacity create jobs in the green economy that allows us to extract all those values? Then for founders like me, then it becomes easy because you can just plug into that whole ecosystem because you have the access to the human resources. And to end, if you don't bring in enough people, the market demand makes it extremely difficult for me to hire an engineer here, a really, really good one, for what I want to do in climate technology. It's extremely expensive. It is super expensive. I'm not talking about, half mediocre, like really, really good engineer, and there's not a lot of them in this continent that exist because we haven't had enough time. But there's a lot of young kids who are extremely intelligent that you could start layering. So to end, we need to go back to the universities at the knowledge center and begin to really drive capacity, because all the global north, where I grew up in Ireland, the universities are where you drive knowledge across different ecosystems, especially if you want to thrive in a new economy. Kids, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24-year-olds, that is where the economy of growth and sustainability for artificial intelligence lives. Actually, not in John, is in those, because what they learn today and the kind of skill set and tools they use. I mean, today it was like prompt engineers. A year ago, there was nothing like a prompt engineer. So.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kamara, for that, and so many layers to your comments. We could unpack this and probably do a PhD thesis on capacity development just from your comments. I so agree with you on just Africa thinking forward on emerging skill sets. And us not constantly relying on the skill sets that the global north is churning out for us. And I think you already just produced another, should I say, job title, carbon extension workers. I love that. Put it in the chat. Whoever is manning the chat, carbon extension workers, just people to really start gathering that ground source data. And I think that is Africa-centric, that's Africa-specific, that probably somewhere else in the global north might not be relevant. And so I think from your comment, I see that you're giving us a call to action to have a paradigm shift in our thinking and in our conceptualization of what capacity really means, and for us to really start creating Afrocentric skill sets or Afrocentric capacity development frameworks and AI for all. Right now, there's so many free AI training tools, and every single youth on the continent should know a bit about AI. Sometimes I imagine being on the streets and having a mic going around talking to all the youth, hey, tell me what AI means, and seeing if each youth really understands what AI means. And every African youth should know what AI means, should understand climate action, and so love that AI ready program for all on the continent. Lots and lots of great things to unpack there. Thank you. Yes, Professor Ponyo, over to you.
Okay. So thank you. Great stuff being talked about, and there is a lot that we are all learning from each other. Thank you, John. Thank you, Nella, and thank you, Rose Margaret, for this. So when it comes to capacity building, for those of us operating in the academic space, there is a lot of responsibility on us to ensure that we are preparing the next generation and even the current generation as far as AI for climate action is concerned. And when it comes to building capacity, as has already been said, it is important that we look at it from various levels. Recently, I was involved in a discussion, and it came to light that when it comes to adoption of AI solutions, the reality is that only about 25% of all those solutions that are rolled out there are actually used. What that primarily means is that if the people who are supposed to use it are sufficiently empowered and have an understanding of what the solution is about, then the uptake is high. The reason I'm saying this is that, for instance, when it comes to AI for climate action, where, for instance, we are looking at application of AI in agriculture and the rest, the people that we are developing the solutions for, a significant percentage of such people are ignorant when it comes to things that relate to IT and all that. And so it becomes important that we build capacity so that adoption can be increased. There must be a lot of awareness with reference to the impact that emerging technologies can have on our day-to-day activities. A case in point is when we developed a solution for smallholder farmers with reference to identification of plant diseases on their farms. And you'll realize that as you interact with the farmers, if they are not very knowledgeable about what you are proposing and it is not plug and play, and they now have to go through a whole new training to be able to understand what it is, the adoption will be very, very minimal. And so primarily what it means is that when it comes to building capacity, we don't have to limit it only to the formal sector. It is important that we look at the informal sector where the significant percentage of people are. And so you talk of extension officers, you talk of farmers, you talk of the ordinary person on the street who actually is going to adopt the technology. It's important that we have short programs, short courses that we use to be able to enlighten such people. So that is one strand that we need to look at. The other one has to do with the formal sector. How are we preparing the next generation of innovators? And primarily what that means is that we need to begin from our senior high schools. The universities, it is important that we develop curriculum that actually transforms our understanding as far as AI is concerned. But the input to the universities are the senior high schools and even at the basic level. And so primarily what it means is that we need to begin to see how we can orient these people as far as AI for climate action and AI and all its interventions are concerned. So let us look at the curriculum at the basic level, at the university level, and even at the senior high level also. And when I talk of let's look at the curriculum, I am not looking at the way of doing things where we bombard them with a lot of theoretical stuff. It is important that we look at it from the context of the doing. It's not about what you know, but how does what you know translate to doing stuff? And so right from the basic level, things like robotics, things like making science interesting, so that at that level, they are using these tools to develop a lot of these things. One of the initiatives of the Responsible AI Lab, currently what we do is that we go to the senior high schools, we set up robotics clubs and then AI clubs to ensure that at that level, they have a lot of interest as far as emerging technologies are concerned so that they grow with it. The last area I want to talk about is people who are in the public sector. They constitute a significant percentage of those who actually are going to be using these technologies. And it's important that in building capacity, we don't ignore them. The policymakers are equally important. We've had interaction with our parliamentarians. We are looking at how we can interact with government workers and also the judges and all that. It is important that those who make the decisions have an understanding of what is required as far as moving the economy forward is concerned. And we need to look at how we can develop innovative programs to bring all these people up to speed as far as new and emerging technologies are concerned. Thank you.
Well, that's really packed, Professor Ponyo. Lots of different layers to your comments. I really like your also call to action. I think all of our speakers today are really giving us great call to actions. Your call to action regarding just thinking about the formal versus the informal sectors. That yes, we have a formal higher education sector, which is crucial and really important in capacity development, but we also have the informal sector, the artisans, and some of the folks that I think Mr. Kamara spoke about, the ground source workers, that they also need training, and then also the public sector. In fact, I saw a publication from the ITU, which is a UN entity, providing funding for training of all public sector workers on AI. Because on digital skills development, it wasn't specifically just AI, but digital skills development, because the public sector needs that training, especially on the continent. There's a huge digital gap in the public sector, and also calling policymakers to also participate in the capacity development charge. So lots of different layers, encouraging the entire educational system, starting from K to 12, as we call it in America, but starting from elementary school to secondary school to higher education, really important, and making science really exciting for folks. So thank you. And I'm seeing great comments in the chat. We'll just have another question, and then I think after that we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So one of the questions that we had is around decarbonization. So we're talking about climate change. Of course, one of the important things there is decarbonization. And so in your areas of expertise, what do you think are the barriers to effective decarbonization? And I think we can start with Mrs. Ekpenyong.
Thank you for that question. And I'm going to put my conservation hat on for this question, but I definitely think when it comes to decarbonization in Africa, it's a multi-pronged issues. I think we've touched on that during this entire session, but it's one being the infrastructure constraints. And I mean, the first thing I noticed I learned the hard way, was also the willpower does not exist, especially coming from an area like Nigeria, where there's a lot of profit to be made from not going towards decarbonization. But what we can do is that we can support our infrastructure and have more time and energies being put towards renewable energies and deployment of whether it's electric vehicles or charging stations, the entire infrastructure that allows us to move towards a more net zero future. There's also, from my lens, a lack of global cooperation that's going on. I think everyone is extremely siloed off. That is a Pan-African problem. Ease of doing business is notoriously difficult here. But then I do think that it is also a multifaceted approach that's going to allow us to solve this. So looking at the leadership and the political incentives, but also supporting technological innovation, public engagement, global collaboration. I think all the panelists have talked about this, is that if we understand what we're trying to achieve and work towards that in a unanimous way, then we can start seeing the fruits of a lot of people's labors. But right now, in this very siloed off manner, it's quite frankly, it's a bit heart-wrenching at times to think about a decarbonized Africa, but I do hope we can get there in the future. But yes, if I was to say one thing, it would be the infrastructure constraints.
And thank you for putting on your conservation hat, because we really needed to hear from you as an expert in conservation. And totally agree. I think one of the issues we face on the continent is siloed entities. And so it is important that we all come together, a united front with a multifaceted approach to addressing the issues of decarbonization. And I think really like the work you're doing with founders on really adopting biomimicry, the biomimicry approach to innovation, because I think that's really one of the ways that we can really push to decarbonize on the continent, because we have our own organic indigenous technologies that are central in decarbonization. So we really need to look at our indigenous technologies and stop.
And if I could just,
yes,
one last thing is that looking at nature as an investable asset. So our project site, Obudu, you know it very well, but it's an area in Africa, which is a biodiversity hotspot, has some of the most interesting ecological sites in the world. But if you could find a way to make nature an investable asset, which they're doing now, you have the land banking group, you have Earth Acre in Kenya. If that's able to come more to the fore, I think that incentive will also trickle down to local communities and we can get on track. So I just wanted to touch on nature as an investable asset.
Okay, thank you very much for touching on that. And the work that you're doing in Obudu is really great with its rich biodiversity and really focusing on land banking. And again, speaking to our indigenous technologies, we've got everything we need on the continent to be at the center of decarbonization. And there's no reason why we shouldn't be. But thank you. And we'll move on to Mr. Kamara, and then we'll go to Professor Ponyo.
Thank you very much, Rose. And now I really like where you came from in terms of what you're doing. My view would be decarbonization and industrialization for Africa, and especially now that we're in this fourth industrial revolution where AI is a huge part, and the development of AI is going to also have massive consumption of energy, and that energy, you know, if we want it to be green, there is a massive cost to that. We still are trying to figure out how to even just decarbonize where we are right now before this whole industrialization. So the question is, you know, what is the price for industrialization? I mean, the world, we have to fix it. So that's not even a question, right? And we have to adapt, and we have to try to make sure that we, you know, safeguard as much as possible this ecosystem. But then again, to the global north, what is the price for our industrialization? And when we, at this point, we still haven't truly industrialized. And now everything that made you possible for you to industrialize, we can't do it. Understood, because the world, but then so then who makes the rules for decarbonization, and who makes the rules for the standards of decarbonization, and who makes the rules for the single truths in that process? So effectively, we are kind of like, you know, stuck in this chicken and egg situation where we are like, okay, we have to do this. We don't have the money to do it. We don't have the infrastructure to do it. We have poverty nonstop. We have lack of industrialization, and to an extent, the will comes from all these things, because so it's a really difficult question, like, you know, and I've attended so many of these things over the past 5, 6, 7 years, and I still can't really balance out an answer that, you know, is genuinely makes sense, because, you know, after COP28, a lot of the money that was decided to go, but a lot of the countries are still, you know, doing exactly the same thing. So if you're offsetting carbon from me just so you can continue doing what you're doing, how does that work? And then I don't even get the money, because you also set the standards for how I'm going to get the money and the financial instruments you created in New York and Geneva and Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. And then we have little projects that happen around green. We have one company do something, and this is a 1.4 billion people. One project is not gonna, and governments, there's some governments in Africa, Mali, like desertification, it's, you know, and this is all part of the global problem of, you know, so carbon. So it's a very difficult one for me. It's very passionate, because I kind of struggle with, you know, the intent and the origination of intent. By who, that origination of intent, and who frames that intent, and who owns the value of that intent. I'm just playing at this tiny little space because, it's not it's the equilibrium. So I'm interested in what is good for Africans here in this continent. What is good for the next generation of young people? How does the next generation of young people in Kenya, in Nigeria, compete with the next generation of young people in Ireland, in the US? Yes, they can, because they're at a stage, it's great, they can do all this stuff, but we're not there yet. So if you're going to truly say that, then you have to allow us to be one to set the standards for how this decarbonization, finance is accrued. You don't set the standards because we're the ones who I agree with you, Della, but I also kind of have this feeling that it's a really difficult one because, to even build a climate technology company in Africa, it's expensive. It's really, really expensive to build a climate tech company. So it's kind of like, very, very, and there's a few folks who are trying, but it's not enough at the scale. Then layer AI on top of it. Mm-hmm. It takes 17 times the amount of power to generate an AI model. That's why data centers are opening all over the world. And those data centers are going to use power. And that power, can you trace that is green power? I mean, there is like the problem in South Africa of energy. To move to green energy from coal is extremely expensive. Mm-hmm. So where do we balance out what we have to do? So I think African leaders, borrowing from what you said, Eliza, and have to really sit down in a room by themselves without anybody else and make a decision of this is how we are going to address everyone else. Rather than you addressing us nonstop in this particular situation. Sorry for my...
No, totally understand. I get passionate about this too and totally understand. And I think to Nella's point, Mr. Kamara, you and Mrs. Ekpeyon, same sentiments. I'm hearing it is difficult, but we've got to put on a united front and stop allowing the global north to dictate how we approach decarbonization. We need to have our own approach, and then we need to reconceptualize what industrialization means for us on the continent. And we cannot adopt industrialization like the global north. I know we're running out of time, so want to give Professor Ponyo an opportunity to also share his comments on that question, and then we'll move on to allowing the audience to ask questions. Yes, Professor Ponyo.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with my colleagues more. And the issue about if we are decarbonizing, what it means is that we have to shift away from fossils and then look at other alternatives that actually do not present us with a lot of viable options as far as a real push as far as industrialization is concerned. And so, as has already been indicated, it is important that we look at what works for our unique situation as Africans. It is important that we do not take global legislation and then try to apply it blindly. For instance, we don't have to apply a legislation as though we all have to migrate to electric vehicles. And if you are not migrating, then it's punitive, and you actually will have to pay more to bring in a vehicle that is powered by fossil. Primarily, what this means is that let's look at what works in our unique situation and then create incentives. So let's create incentives such that where people will want to go the green way, let's create avenues through which they are incentivized to do so and not punish those who are going the fossil route. Because the reality is that if people need money to be able to develop their economies, and let's say fuel and oil and gas is all that they have, and they are not being allowed to do that, then primarily that is an issue that borders on fairness. And so, as has already been said, let's have African leaders and then in a room and decide on what uniquely works as far as our unique African situation is concerned, and not go for situations where people in the global north will make legislations and then we now have to apply it to ourselves. And then at the end of the day, even what we all have agreed that we are doing, you look at it and at the blind side, other people are actually doing it. And so the barriers borders on what works for us. And as has already been said, when it comes to AI, for instance, there is the need for data and there is the need for compute. And to compute, you actually need a lot of power to be able to do that. How do we get there if we are migrating to green energy, where there are other options that can help us be able to get to that point? And so we all want to save the planet, but it is important that we create a balance so that in saving the planet, we don't let people go hungry. It's important that we balance the two and ensure that people are not being punished because they actually want to be able to eat and take care of their families. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ponyo. So just striking that balance that Mr. Ekpenyong, Mr. Kamara also spoke to is extremely important, and bringing all African leaders together in a room to have that conversation for Africa to really drive its own policy, drive its own innovation, and utilize our indigenous technologies, because our forefathers, believe it or not, were the leaders in conservation and sustainable technologies, and still managed to feed themselves and had that sort of industrialization. So thank you so much, panelists, for the amazing discussions and conversations. I see all the chats buzzing. Want to open it up to the audience for any questions. I know we are almost at time, but any immediate questions? Mr. Ade, please, if you could help check if there are questions from the audience, or any audience, please, if you have a question, you can raise your hand so we can allow you to speak. I see maybe there was a question for Mr. Kamara, but I think you... Okay, so there's a question from Tanya. What is the best perspective for consideration of data sovereignty in development of AI data sets in Africa? This is also considering issues of data privacy and the development of data commons. So open to any of our panelists. Which of our panelists would like to tackle that question?
So the question borders on data sovereignty, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's one of two things. We want to develop. And if we want to develop with AI, we need data to be able to train our models. And so the data also that we are collecting, there are regulations and there are rules with reference to its use. And so at the end of the day, it is important that we push for the responsible use as far as the data that we are gathering is concerned, because at the end of the day, we are going to use it to develop solutions that are going to be to the benefit of all. Now, when it comes to crossing boundaries, where we actually need to make the data available so that other people within outside the jurisdiction can also use it, it becomes important that at the regional level and even at the global level, we subscribe to certain frameworks and certain standards as far as the use of data is concerned. I agree perfectly that data privacy laws must be respected, and that is the reason why we need to subscribe to various global regulations that border on how to use data. But if we are so stringent to the point that we do not make the data available, the benefit that we can derive as far as AI solutions are concerned, we wouldn't have. And so, yes, when it comes to data, let us respect the privacy of the people from whom we collect the data. But at the end of the day, let us make it available so that we can develop solutions for everybody. Currently, the data that we have, most of them are from the global north. As we gather data in the global south, let us have an agreement with reference to how to use the data so that at the end of the day, we are respecting the privacies of people, but we're also developing solutions that are to the benefit of all. Thank you.
Can I chime in? I think, perfectly said, Prof. One of the things that I kind of always talk about is, the ethics of data, and goes back to the question around capacity development. I think a lot of one of the biggest problems in the conversation about data is lack of knowledge. And, in institutions, in universities, even in founders or people, it's just lack of knowledge. And also in policymakers, is like, I'll give you an example. As a policymaker who becomes Minister of Agriculture, 2 years ago, he was a school teacher. Now, the data policy for the past 5, 10 years, 20 years, when he just sees it, he just says, yes, we're not going to change anything, because nobody has bothered to actually educate him on the tangible and commercial value of that data for his country and how the structure of that data should work. So when then you go to the data protection commissioner, it's all about protectionism of data. There is a commercial value to a country of data. Now, if you look at the spectrum of data, there is individual data, there's John's data, there's Nela's data, but as a group, that data is important for actually the structure and development of the country. So you also have a right, you have a duty to make that data available so that you actually, during COVID, right? Because each individual's data was what made up the data aggregation models that you use to actually track and manage the disease. But if we said that because there's data protection, we can't use your data, then you put me at risk, and you put the next person at risk, and you put the next person at risk. So then there's a part of, consensus. So the question is the building consensus networks where everybody understands why, and they are part of that consensus network. So training people about what the idea of consensus means in data and the value of that consensus, and you can audit that consensus nonstop. Then you remove a lot of the problem of privacy or not, because I'm part of the consensus network and I understand the audit trails within the consensus network. So that way, even from a government perspective, you're consistently increasing the sovereignty value of that data. I will, by default, consistently provide data. The way you think about it is the human being is the one that provides data. Without the human being, there is no data. That's it. Without humans hit everything, a transaction happens and data comes. So once you think about that, so even when you build infrastructure around human beings, because the human being provides data, then you use that to actually develop. So for Africa, if we're going to leapfrog the world, as we said, then we have a chance to create open data frameworks that the world doesn't have. Data privacy, HIPAA, all these things, they still haven't figured it out in Europe. They still haven't figured it out properly in America. And it also comes with a lot of other type of structure with infrastructure. You don't have the infrastructure, you just adopt a data privacy law from somewhere. It doesn't really make any sense. But if you look at consensus models where you bring the individual into the network and you provide, and also if you go back and you're able to align where is the commercial value of the data for our economy, where is the protection right of that data, and where is the sovereignty of ownership of the data back to the individual at every point in time, and where is the consistent reference of the use of that data, then you're beginning to build a whole new different framework of what data means and what the value, when you talk about data as crude oil. Now to me as John, data also becomes crude oil, because it's important that it's crude oil to me, not just to the government or not just to the founders, to John, the end user. So think about a first mile identity rather than the last mile, because people worry about data too much because the human is the last mile in the identity of data. But I am the first mile. Without me, there is no data. So to you, we can continue the conversation. I look at my latest data thesis that I wrote for the government on how to rechange data thoughts and realign yourself within your own framework ecosystem, what data truly means, what privacy, sovereignty, ownership, governance and securitization within a consensus network for data could be like.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kamara, for that. Definitely important for us to understand that we're positioned in the value chain of data creation, and as such should be compensated for the data that is produced from us. And I think it's a big conversation happening here in the US. We have another question. I know we're really over time. But I'd like to take just one question from Mr. Saeed, if that's okay with the panelists, and we'll wrap up in about 5 minutes. So Mr. Saeed, I'll just pick one of your questions. Looking at the impact of creative content on the continent, how can we strategically target and simplify the process for producers to help spread and shape this urgent narrative? And maybe one panelist can respond to that question.
If I may,
Yes,
real quickly, I was at the AfriExim event last year in November, and it was about the creative industry, one of the big things. And with the Nexus, one of the things you have to realize with AI, the first people that are going to get cannibalized are creative. It's just right now I can make a video better than most videographers in minutes. What does that mean for that videographer? I can create content that is not real and make it look real. So there were some ladies from Ghana who make this outfit, and they talked about their IP they've been making for years and years and years, but now people can make those things via AI. So I think the critical thing is, when I was telling the AfriExim, is you need to provide capacity for people in industry to understand how to use this technology to increase their productivity and ultimately be able to put their signature on it. So instead of someone cannibalizing me by doing what I will have to spend 3 months doing, someone can do it in 5 minutes, I can teach you how to do that thing in 5 minutes. When you're done, you can put your signature on it. So which means rather than doing one, you can do 10. So you can reduce your pricing, you can do more stuff and still be competitive and still own your space because so I thought about 30 creatives, how to use AI tools. And 2 months later, like last month, about 6 of them came to me and said, I make more money now than I used to make, and I have more time for myself. And now I'm learning more AI too. So now I'm telling founders, now build AI solutions for the creative industry, because these people are beginning to get it in Africa. That becomes an opportunity. So I think the creative industry is both a problem and an opportunity if we look at it from the different perspective. And I think a lot of what we need to do is literally provide capacity development for these folks and also align them with how to then use, tools to really remove a lot of, piracy and content piracy within their industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamara, for that. And I think with that, we will kind of start wrapping up the panel discussion. I know we could be here forever. I'm like, maybe we should have made this 2 hours, because like the conversation is not ending. But thank you so much, amazing panelists. Please, let's put our hands together for our panelists virtually. Really power-packed panelists and folks that are here to really shape the future of AI and climate action on the continent. I know we had other questions, but please feel free to connect with the panelists on LinkedIn. So panelists, if you don't mind putting your LinkedIn or any of your social media handles in the chat, and also follow us, African Technology and Innovation Institute, on LinkedIn and social media. And this video will be played on YouTube with the permission of the panelists, so that folks can all that missed the event can also listen in. So please, let's put all our contact information there, and we can continue this conversation offline. Just before we wrap up, wanted to announce we can't play the video of the spoken word on AI and climate action that was put together by your youth, but wanted to say that the winners of the poetry and spoken word competition around the continent was Annette Chinelone Wafo. She's the winner and she'll be getting $50 for her efforts. She got 218 likes for her post just in, I think, 3 days. We have Benjamin Chimuduto, praise God, 180 likes. That's the first runner-up, and a second runner-up, Sophia Michael-Pan, 147 likes. And we'll be sharing all this on our social media platforms for folks to follow and see, and they will receive their little certificates for their efforts. And so these are efforts by AfriTechie to get our youth really interested in AI, interested in climate action through things that they like spoken word and poetry. Okay, well, just one last comment from our panelists. Could you, in 30 seconds, give us your closing statements? Whether it's word of advice for the youth, whether it's a word of advice for our leaders, whether it's a call to action, whatever you want us to tweet on. A tweetable comment, 30 seconds. Thank you. Okay. Yes, Professor Ponyo.
Okay. Yeah. The future belongs to those who can navigate their way through the digital space. You are either with us or you are extinct. And it's important that we use every second to build capacity. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Professor Ponyo. That is definitely tweetable. Okay. Yep. Cut that. Thank you. Yes, Mr. Kamara.
No, great panel. Nice. Just leave no country behind in Africa, and make sure that every country we build AI readiness programs that allow us to take these jobs of the future for our people.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Kamara. Leave no one behind. And we've got to really spread the word on AI. Thank you. A united Africa. Tweetable. United Africa. Yeah. Yes, and Mrs. Ekpeyon?
I guess let's harness the power of AI to drive our sustainable development.
Wow. Yes, love that. Let's harness the power of AI to deliver sustainable development. Thank you. Tweet, tweet, tweet all around. Well, I know you're super busy people. Just wanted to say a very big thank you for making our time for these great conversations. And I think we're all going to continue these conversations offline. One of our questions by, I think, Mr. Saheed was, hey, put all this together and take to the government. And I think we've got the right people here to do that. So we'll definitely continue our conversations offline. But thank you, and let's continue pushing Africa forward. Africa is a leader, and yes, we will not be left behind in the digital space and in sustainable development. Thank you all attendees for joining, and see you next time at our next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Have a great day. Bye.
Yeah, have a great one. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.